Hey everyone, welcome back to Matrimonial Merger. Today, Jesse and I are going to talk about perfectionism and how sometimes people allow perfectionism to hold them back from really going for what they want to go for. And that need for or idea of perfection just kind of keeps their potential totally under the cover. So, and this is something I'm excited about because I can relate to this a
Mhm.
lot. I think you can attest to that.
Yeah, and I can totally as well in my,
Yeah.
my situation. In fact, something just happened the other day where I was sitting there doing a video, and in the video, after it was all said and done, it's been posted, it's been distributed, everything's done. There's a small spelling error.
Yeah. You just should
And
have never showed it to me.
and the thought process of, "Oh my gosh, I should probably just delete this
Yeah,
or and then redo it," but it took hours,
yeah,
and it would have taken another hour to go back and do that. And the question is does it really matter at the end of the day?
yeah. Is that time going back and, redoing an entire video for, one little spelling error, which maybe in some cases that would be necessary, right? Like, I'm not saying that that's not always necessary, but in this case, the funny thing is in the past, I literally would have been like, "You're not gonna fix that? Like,
Mhm.
you gotta fix that." Like, I don't know, I would have such a hard time getting over the fact that, there's an error. But at the end of the day, I also think people like authenticity, right? Like,
Sure.
it's okay. And maybe someone will call you out on it. Maybe you can just put something in the comments like, "Hey, catch my mistake," something like,
Yeah.
"Pay attention and you might catch a spelling error." Like, just allow it to be part of your video and just kind of be authentic, be who you are rather than going back and spending another hour of your time to fix this one thing that really at the end of the day probably won't matter that much.
Yeah.
It's just kinda like choosing, right? Choosing what what's the best use of your time.
Right. Absolutely, and I think that perfectionism is an overrated idea or philosophy that we're all trying to chase.
Well,
We
first of
have
all,
to
what
be
even is it?
right, and that's the biggest thing is like, okay, I have to be perfect at doing something every single time. Okay, well, I don't know if there's anyone in this world, unless it's Christ himself, that has perfection in every aspect
Mhm.
of what they do. Now, there's people that are very, very good and talented, and in some cases, we call them a goat or the greatest of all time,
Yeah,
right? But even then, there's mistakes because our
yeah.
life is an ever evolving loop of feedback.
And that's how we learn and how we become, perfect. I mean, honestly, I don't even love that word because I think a lot of times we're measuring perfection based off of, what we're seeing from someone else, right?
Mhm.
So, you see someone else's success, where they're at, and you kind of are like, "That's what I want." But until you know, the steps and what it takes and you receive that feedback and you get to that point, I mean, you'll you probably will just never do it because you're like, "I don't know. I don't know what the process looks like. I just know that's what I want, and I don't know how to get that, so I'm just not gonna do it."
Right.
Or, like, you kinda have the process figured out, but there's a few, gaps or a few things that you're not sure of, and rather than, allowing the process, you're just like, "I'm not gonna do it because I don't know exactly how, we're getting from, N to O
Yeah.
or from P to Q."
And I love that you're saying like perfectionism is an assumption of what we're perceiving, right?
Mhm.
Our eyes lied to us because what we're assuming or what we're perceiving as perfectionism may actually not be perfect at all.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a quote from Deepak Chopra. And it reminds me of a story of a good friend of mine. I remember we were about 5 years married and we're sitting there at lunch with
You and your
him.
good friend or
No,
you
no,
and
no,
me?
you and
Oh,
I,
okay, okay.
we were there.
Just kidding.
We were there, and I'm sorry, I'm off 3 hours of sleep,
Yeah, poor
so
Jesse. Not a
yeah,
good
today. So,
it's all good.
anyways, we're at lunch with a friend of mine, Ambry and I, and this individual, and he's not married. We're talking to him. This had to have been about 5 years ago, and I'll never forget, like, he started telling us how he wanted to get married and all these things that were important to him in
And
his
of course, then,
relationship.
I'm over here like, "Let's find someone for you to date." Like,
Right.
"Who do you like? Like, what kind of girls do you like? Like, what color hair?" Like, I'm like, "Let's figure this out."
And he slowly started to just describe what you and I had had after 5 years of a relationship. No drama. I want someone that is, supporting me, willing to take risks with me. And he was saying all these things. And I finally just kind of called him out and I was like, dude, like
Yeah.
that takes work. Like that's 5
Yeah,
years
of
of
effort and growth.
laying a foundation and starting to
Yeah,
build the things you want. 5 years, like, are you even prepared? If your spouse had all these things, are you prepared for that?
right,
And that was the biggest question, and I don't know if I made him happy about that, but I'll never forget that conversation because it comes back down to, like, your life is all
yeah,
about effort and taking that feedback every single day and becoming better. And then when you do get married or you do start a business, it doesn't stop there. It's
right.
consistent effort all the time.
Right, and I think I wanna, like, hit home too that, like, there's nothing wrong with having the desire of knowing where you want to be, what you want that relationship to look like, right? And that's a good thing,
Yeah,
right? I
we'd
mean, I think
recommend that.
honestly, even back then when we had this conversation, like, this was probably 6 plus years ago, I don't know if I realized that like I do now, but, I mean, I admire the fact that he had an idea of, like, certain things that he wanted,
Mhm.
but you gotta be willing to start somewhere and
Right.
put in the effort and the consistency and continue. And sure, like, especially when it comes to a relationship, it's great to give like proper expectation and communicate your needs up front. I
Yeah.
am 100% in support of that. But like in particular, this situation, they talked about being able to go for like a week and do like a hobby they wanted to do and like have their spouse have no problem with that. And I literally laughed because I was like at that time like I was, like, getting maybe to that point, but I laughed thinking, like, when Jesse and I were first married, like, I had a hard time when he wanted to go just, like, play basketball for 4 hours. I'm like, "What am I supposed to do while you're gone?" Like, you
Right.
don't wanna, like, just stay and hang out with me? Like, I mean, obviously, every relationship is so different, but, like, for us, I was like, it took me, like, a year to finally be like, "Oh, yeah, Jesse's gonna go play basketball. It's fine." Like, I was still, like, learning myself, my hobbies, and we're, like, growing together, and so, like, when he said something like that, I was just laughing because 'cause I'm like, at the beginning of our marriage, I would have been like, "Wait, what? Like, you
Yeah.
wanna leave for a week? Like, why?
Yeah.
Why do you wanna do that?" And so,
But
um
then on the flip side, you would have to be okay if she wanted. In his case,
sure.
if she wanted
Yeah,
to leave for a week,
yeah.
he'd have to be okay. And I don't know if he was there.
I don't know
I'm not
either.
gonna assume and I'm not gonna say, but that's a
Yeah.
good question to ask yourself.
It all comes down to, like, sure, have the idea, have the design, but be willing to start. Be willing to begin somewhere, and it doesn't have to you don't have to have all of the answers right now, but if
Yeah.
you have the motivation, the desire, and the willingness to commit, like, I mean, I know we're not talking about relationships, but since that's, like, the parallel we just drew, like, I look at it and go, to be quite honest, like, had you and I, like, known some of the struggles we'd have, some of the things we would go through, like, would we have committed at 18 and what, 21? Were you
Yeah,
21?
21.
Years old, and just been like, "Hey, we've been dating for, like, 2 months. Let's get married." Like,
Yeah,
I mean, we dated for from when we met to when we got married, it was, like, barely 7 months,
right.
and I was barely 19, like, when we got married. So I look at it and go, "If we would have known exactly all of those things, would we have ever committed? Would we have, like, truly committed?"
Right.
I don't know. I would like to think yes, but I also feel like there's a certain aspect where, like, then you start to bring in a lot of, like, doubts and fears rather than, like, at the time, we were just like, "We know we both have the desire. We know we're both committed, so, like, let's go. We'll
Yeah.
figure it out. Like, whatever comes our way, we can figure it out."
Well, and that's the biggest question is if you didn't know all the things you go through, I think a lot of people would just say, "Yeah, no," and
Right.
they just wouldn't wanna start.
Yeah.
And it's because, once again, it is the effort and your intention. You and I jumped into a relationship, and it was a lot of just love, we
Yeah.
don't know any different, and we learned a ton the
Yeah.
first 2 years. Even now, almost going on year 11, there's still so much we're learning about one another
Yeah.
that had we known each other's weaknesses and stuff, we wouldn't have had time to develop the love. We would have been saying, "Oh,
Absolutely.
this person has too much baggage,
Yeah.
and this is a
Or
huge
they're gonna go through
commitment."
this or experience that, like,
Right.
I don't know if I can handle that, or
Right.
I mean, me 11 years ago would have never been able to comprehend, like, our life right now,
No.
and
Uh,
so I might have just been like, "What?" So,
right. I couldn't do it
there's so
either.
much beauty in, like, every phase of the process, whether it's a relationship or a business, like,
Right.
I mean, I look at let's go back to, like, our real estate business when we first started, like, there's so much beauty there in the form of like excitement, energy, like we're starting something new. We have this great idea, like we believe in it. We're kind of like a little nervous because we both quit full-time jobs to do, to build something together.
Right.
And so there's a certain level of uncertainty, but we're like, hey, we've got a little bit of savings, like let's go all in. And that's fun. Like that's kind of like the beginning of the relationship where you're like, this is fun, like we really
Right.
like each other. I don't know exactly what this is going to look like, but like I'm excited.
Right.
This is fun. And then you've got like the process, like the courtship, right? The feedback, the
Yeah.
first like argument. You've got the first like slip up in a process of your business, the
Yeah.
first negative customer feedback, whatever that is, whether it's a relationship or your business, like that happens. And that's different, right? And
Yeah.
that can also be very like interesting and exciting because it requires you to think outside your current reality and grow.
Well, you mentioned like the first feedback, and I remember when we had about $50,000 in commissions like ready to go
Yeah.
in a single month, and we were like, "Holy crap!" Like
Like
$50,000 is
impending
right, and pending
transactions, right?
transactions like ready to close, and we're going, "Oh my gosh, this is so much money, more money than we made last year in a single month."
Right.
So what do? We went and booked this cruise,
Yeah.
and all $50,000 fell out of contract, and I'll never forget sitting on that cruise because we went, we
Uh,
paid for it,
yeah.
we put it on a credit card, money
No
we didn't
regrets there.
have. No,
Well, did we
but
put a
we did, we put it
oh,
on a credit
man.
card, and we were
Good for
sitting
us.
there going because we thought we would have it
Yeah.
all, and then we sat there on that cruise going, "Well, this
Yeah.
isn't as fun." Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of feedback here, and then, we
We
had to get
learned
back,
so much through that though. Like
but that's the thing is the
and a lot of
learning.
those transactions, like we got them back into pending, like
Yeah,
everything, but it was like learning the things that could happen in a transaction and
right,
how to prevent and or like just mitigate risk, right? How to
exactly.
like how to work through some of the feedback and I mean, exciting in a different way maybe, but that's another like beautiful part of the process.
Yeah.
And then you've got like I don't even know how to describe like the arrival though. I don't feel like that is it really a thing, but like you have
Arrival
all
can't
these
yeah, you
like there's
can't
never like the perfection, like oh we
right.
made it, right? Like
So why do we strive for perfection then?
that's
Why
a good question because I mean, I'm looking back and I'm like, we've had several years of really great, successful business in our real estate. And I wouldn't say like, oh, we've arrived, right?
right,
I'm super proud of some of like the milestones we hit or awards we've received, things like that. But, it's not like, oh, this is what we envisioned when we very first started, like we're done.
yeah,
It's like, okay, now what?
right. Well, and that's my biggest question is like, why do we strive for perfection as a culture? What does that mean even? Because we know that there's always going to be feedback. And even as you continue to climb, there's feedback. You and I are experiencing feedback right now financially based
Yeah.
off of some of the decisions we made. And could those decisions pan out in a very positive way? I think we're both planning on that to
Yeah.
happen. However, right now, when things are tight and there's debt being leveraged and things
Mhm.
like that, would make a lot of people feel uncomfortable. You and I are just going through the motions and trying to address the feedback and asking ourselves questions of how to
Yeah.
become resourceful. Is that perfectionism? No. But for whatever reason, when this whole situation happens and
Mhm.
all of a sudden our net worth triples or quadruples, then it would be easy for people to perceive, oh, they're just perfect. Everything's perfect. When realistically, it wasn't perfect
Yeah.
throughout the process. It's
Yeah.
just the reward for going through the feedback that you're
Yeah.
getting that others perceive once again as perfection.
Right. And I think part of that goes back to, something we've talked about in various like angles and topics is goes back to like your intention, your purpose, your why, right? Because I just listened to a podcast this last week by let's see, it was Carlin Call. She's runs a podcast called Just Ingredients and she had Dr. Axe on as a guest. Um and they were talking about, like, health, right, and a lot of these really cool things that I'm totally geek out over, but they talked about it's almost like our society is addicted to, like, stress, right? Like,
Yes.
that's the best way I can put it simply, but he talked about, like, once upon a time, or even in, like, I wish I could, like, remember exactly his words, but I'll just kinda paraphrase what I remember, but that our society has kinda become focused so much on, like, status and money and, like, chasing those things, like, kinda elevating yourself, right?
Yes.
And maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? But with that comes a lot of, like, certain feedback, stress, and anxiousness, and maybe neglecting your health, neglecting your family, all for the purpose of money, wealth, status, whatever.
Right.
Um, Whereas, like, once upon a time, or I think he might have even been talking about, like Chinese medicine and, like, the Western, part of the world, but was all about family and your, like, the respect that you were viewed from other the way that other people viewed you and the respect they had for you had more to do with, like, your family and your beliefs, who you actually are as a person, rather than your status, your money, the material things. Does
Right.
that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's difficult because I think sometimes we're chasing that, which those things aren't bad, right? Like, it's not a bad thing. But what's your intention and what's your purpose behind it? Because that is truly what is going to get you towards your goal of whatever perfection is for you,
Right. And I want to eliminate perfection completely
right?
because
I'm okay with that
I
too.
think that perfection blocks vulnerability. And
Yeah, that's true.
vulnerability is truly how we feel, how we connect as human beings. And so, our goal and striving as a society to become perfect
Yeah,
or perfected blocks the real sense of life, the vulnerability aspect, the weaknesses, the showing like the hero's journey where we see someone come up from nothing and we're cheering for them.
yeah,
But if we're always trying to be perfect and hiding behind the mask of perfection, no one gets that vulnerability, no one gets that
yeah.
rawness. And then all of a sudden we're clouded by the crap you see on social media where, someone's sitting in their Lamborghini or they're so cool and like I'd be one to talk. We had a McLaren, right? And that was totally based off of perfectionism and look how great we are. And I'll be honest, I'll be the first one to admit that that was one of the driving forces for me. But looking back at all of this, the idea of perfectionism
Yeah,
just doesn't make any sense to me because it really hides the vulnerability and the raw emotions of connecting with people and building one another up and helping other people do things that they may not believe they can do for themselves.
sure,
And so I think that perfectionism is a prideful and egotistical way of hiding your vulnerability.
sure. Okay, so then let's talk about, because, like, we base a lot of what we do off of, like, faith and religion, right?
Sure.
So then you've got the scripture that
Mhm.
is like,
Be
I'm
ye
trying to look,
perfect.
Matthew 5:48. Yeah, be therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. Even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. Anyways.
Yeah.
So, like, a lot, what are your thoughts on that? And I'm willing to share mine as well, but
Yeah. I mean,
that that comes to my mind right when we're talking about perfection. And I think that the two, like, the definitions where, like, the scripture and where it's going versus, like, the idea of being perfect and perfectionism in the world, I think they're two very different things,
sure.
to be fair. But I'm just gonna throw that out there because I know some people are gonna think of that and be like,
Yeah.
"Well,
The
there's this
scriptures
scripture that
say
tells
this.
us."
Yeah.
So, thoughts?
I think that being perfect means being aligned, like
Mhm.
understanding where you want to go in this life and where you want to take it, and being perfectly aligned with yourself and with God, right? Understanding the intentions behind everything that you're doing,
Yeah.
right? Why are you working in this job? If you hate your job and you're working there, what's the intent behind working at a place you hate, right? And understanding that.
Yeah.
If you are struggling with your weight and you want to lose weight, Ask yourself what's the intent of losing the weight and understanding the deeper meaning and the
Yeah.
intention behind why you want a certain thing.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where that scripture falls into place. Like if you truly want to live with God, what's your intent?
Yeah.
Why? Why do you want to? And as you understand that, the deeper your meaning, the deeper your desire and understanding of what you want, the easier it becomes for you to go get it.
I like that.
I don't
That's a
know.
good answer. I think one of the leaders of our church, or members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and one of the members of our church gave a talk once that talked about, like, that scripture because, I mean, I think people do start to put a lot of pressure on themselves, like, well, it's impossible to be perfect, like, especially in this world, like, I don't think we're necessarily, like, going to be like our Heavenly Father to a T in this fallen world, right? But, like, what is that process? And I think it has to do more with the process than the arrival, right? And
Sure.
this one of the leaders of our church gave a talk about that, saying like, "Be therefore perfect eventually."
Mhm.
Like, it's about the striving and the working towards
Yeah,
rather than just like being there. And I
sure.
think that sometimes we focus so much on the like arrival and what it, that I think we should envision and we should create like what that would look like, right?
Right,
And then go towards, right? Go towards it, learn what you need to learn in the process, fall down a few times if you have to, right?
right.
And then allow yourself the permission to get back up and keep going and to learn from that feedback and become even better. And you might even find that the idea you had of this perfectionism wasn't even exactly, what it should be.
Yeah. And I think, like, for me, like, let's talk about family photos as I think of perfectionism because this is
Because
something
everyone like envisions a perfect family photo.
and I hate it, and
I know
I
you
like,
do.
it's culturally the worst thing ever is let's
I'm
get
sure you have a
this.
lot of people out there, like, especially probably a lot of the, like, men and husbands and what fathers out there that are just like, "Preach.
Well,
Family photos are the worst."
I just hate the concept because it's like the family photos, we're trying to make everyone feel out of character, smiling and focusing on creating the best possible photo to capture a moment when no one is truly themselves. So how could they truly be happy? Right? And we're all trying to capture this moment for what? To look at this photo and say, there's a fake version of me smiling.
What?
That's
Don't you love having the family pictures on the
Now
wall,
don't get me
though?
wrong. I enjoy the family photo, but what I'm saying is like this idea of the perfect family
Okay, so
photo
if
or
if I'm
all of us
understanding
have to
right.
dress a certain
Yeah,
way
okay.
for looking this and like we're trying to make
Yeah.
this perfect when it's like, well, you're pulling me out of my natural style, the way that I'm truly happy. So how can you truly look at that photo and say, "Oh, that's perfect," when you know deep
Well,
inside those emotions aren't
I
perfect?
think then like, if you want my honest opinion, at that point, you're lacking alignment,
Hmm.
or no?
Are you
Because, like we talk about, like, being able to go into an environment and still, like, be yourself and be
sure?
aligned. So, like, I have a very different perspective, obviously, because I'm the one on this side that's like, we're gonna have this family picture, we're gonna match. Like,
Yeah.
I still am 100% on board with everyone having their own personality and flair on that, right?
Right.
But I'm like, hey, like, I think it's great if we have like a general color scheme.
Yeah.
And, I do think that sometimes it gets a little out of hand and stress then, creeps in and then it just kind of can ruin the whole experience. But I think it's great to have like a color scheme and have
I'm not saying that there's anything
and
wrong,
have
but
like outfits and all of that.
there's a photo of me with my mom, and we are like our family. My mom got married when I was 15, and there's a photo of all of me, like, and my family and my step siblings. And there's me standing perfectly straight up, very tense in a shirt that's two sizes too small,
Mhm.
and I'm trying to hide my gut,
Okay.
right? That's not perfection. And I look at that photo and I go,
So what
I
would you rather have? Like,
I
what
would have
would you
rather
want
been able
instead?
to wear the clothes that I wanna wear and be me,
Yeah.
right?
So you
And
feel like
so
in that situation you were like forced to wear a certain thing, like,
oh,
which
totally,
I can
totally.
understand, and that's good feedback because like that makes me think, maybe I should. And I do try, like, our daughter, both our kids actually are very strongly opinionated and have,
Yes.
like,
They
their
get that from me.
style and their,
Yes.
idea of what they want. Um, so, like, in the long run, like, do some of those small details really matter? No. So I
Right.
get where you're coming from, like, there's some ways where you can just stop stressing and get it done. Like,
Yeah.
get the family picture done so you can have it on the wall.
Right.
So I can see where you're coming from, and I also think that I love family
I
pictures.
get it. And but that's the thing, is like, what is the intention behind it? Because if you're truly trying to do it for the intention of having perfection, well, perfection's never going to be perfection for everyone in the room, because perfection's a different idea for everyone else.
Well, what that looks like right now to you versus in 10
Yeah,
years could be different because I know,
totally.
like, there's some, like, pictures or circumstances where it's like, at the time, it was like, "Oh, this is a disaster." Then 10 years later, it's, like, hilarious, and you're so glad that happened
Sure.
because it's real. It's, like,
Right.
what actually happened.
Or like the conversation of, "Oh, if I could go back and do my whole wedding, I would do it differently again." Right? Like,
100% I
the
would, but
colors and everything. But that's the thing, is back in the time, that
Yeah,
was everything
right.
you wanted, right? And so I would say, like, quit striving to be perfect. Strive to be
Strive
aligned
strive to
with your
be
intention.
perfectly aligned,
Right.
but stop like, get away from the idea of striving for this, like, perfection. I
Yes.
think there's a difference there between, like, perfectly aligned and perfectionism
Right.
in itself, right?
And I think that the culture, specifically here in Utah, I'll be very, very honest. I think that there are some cultural environments that, like, people feel, not necessarily they have to, but people feel they need to be
Yeah,
perfect. And therefore they once again block their vulnerability and the things they're truly
mhm,
struggling with. And that, I believe personally, that's one of the highest reasons why
yeah,
there's such a insane amount of mental health issues in this state,
yeah.
as well as suicides.
Um, I mean, it can be really easy to judge very quickly, right?
Yes.
And so, like, that's the easiest route most of the time, unless you've reprogrammed your mind to respond differently. Like, I had a friend this week who took an opportunity to be super vulnerable on social media, and it seems like she was very misread by a lot of people and received a lot of feedback she felt was very negative. And it's like we need more of that in our world, though, like the
Yes.
real journey, the raw journey, because this particular person, like, she's extremely successful in my eyes and does a lot of really cool things that, you know, I admire because it's not a lot of them are things that I've never had the desire to do or just, maybe wouldn't feel comfortable doing right now. I don't know, but she does a lot of incredible things, and the fact that she can go and, like, put herself out there as a real raw human with relatable emotions and then, receive the feedback from that. Obviously, we can all learn, like, how to receive feedback and then what to do next,
Right.
but being able to be real
Mhm.
is becoming rare
Right.
in our society. And I think that does have a lot to do with social media. And, a lot of times we get on social media, and if you like follow influencers, there are a lot of incredibly like talented, raw, real influences out there. And there's a lot of influencers who are very help me out here.
Yeah, I would
I
just say
don't I'm trying to
they're very focused
it's
on showing you a perfect
yes,
life,
delivering
or
like and they're really good at what they do, right? But
right.
delivering like a perfect aesthetic, perfect content, like and
Yeah.
it's not to say that's bad, we could all do that, right? We all
Yeah.
have this side of our life that could look picture perfect if we wanted it to.
Yeah.
So that's a real thing. However, like subconsciously, if all you're seeing is like this data of like perfectionism and nothing ever goes wrong and the life is perfect and all these things, like that's a lot of data being installed that then you start to feel like, well, if I have real emotions or if things actually go wrong or if things look different than, these blocks I see on social media, then something must be wrong. Like I should be unhappy or I should
Right.
be unsatisfied. And so I think sometimes it just creates this unreal expectation of what the process is. Because sometimes it is like it's a little crazy.
I'm gonna go off on a tangent here. And so bear with me.
Okay.
But you mentioned your friend on social media, and this thought came to my mind, is when she received the feedback, she didn't handle the feedback too well. Like, from my perspective, from my model of the world, there was a lot of, like, maybe people were reaching out in a way that according to their model of the world was being helpful, but she didn't perceive it as
Yeah.
helpful.
Well, I
And
think it
so
comes from assumptions on both sides,
right.
right?
And so my question is though, is when you do become vulnerable
Mhm.
and someone does reach out and help you, is it your ego or this, "Oh, no, I can't let them think this of me," or, "Well, it wasn't actually that
Yeah.
bad." Is it your ego trying to suppress the real vulnerability and
Yeah.
need, and thus not allowing you to actually feel like someone's helping
Yeah.
you and receive that? Or are you literally just creating drama out of it because it's hurting your ego because you're too focused on trying to live this superficial life?
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure that's valid because I can see that in myself, right? Like
Yeah.
I have had there's been a few times recently where I've had friends that have legitimately been like struggling, experiencing something real
Mhm.
and relatable, and they've like told me about it. And I just like I feel so much love and respect for them because I realize what a strength it is to be able to say like I'm not okay right now.
Right.
Or, you know, this isn't like happening exactly how I would want. Or, I'm experiencing feedback. And I think that there's so much strength in that because you allow doors to open.
Yeah.
You allow people that have other perspective, experience, maybe they've gone through what you've gone through and maybe from a different angle. And then you allow that into your experience and you get to choose what you want, what you don't, right? It
Sure.
doesn't mean that just because someone like tells you something, you have to believe it or do it, right?
Right.
You get to choose what you do with that information. But I think so many times for me, that's where the true like value and growth comes is when I allow myself to consider something else. And I
Yeah.
used to not be very open to that, to be honest. Like I was
Mhm.
not for a long time and not very like suggestible. Like it was like blinders almost like this is the way, this is what it is,
Sure.
and lacking the consideration of other, what am I not considering?
Yeah.
What else is there? There's like my reality and my model of the world is not the only one.
Right. It's
So,
interesting, like, I just signed up for another coach. This is coach number 4, right? I have 4 different coaches in my life right now. And I
I was
think
gonna
you've
say
got
number 4 currently.
currently, right. Like, there are
Active,
4 active
actively,
coaches
yeah.
in my life right now, and every one of them's
Countless
different.
in the past.
Right, and this is what's so interesting is this particular coach, I've cried in front of him. I've He's put me in front of a group of people, like, so we have a cohort where you have all these other people, and I don't even know these people, and I've cried in front of those people,
Really?
right? And it's just like I've been super vulnerable and super raw, but the thing is all of these people collectively come together and they give me like amazing advice on the things that I'm
Yeah,
struggling with. In
yeah,
fact, I got 9 questions today from one individual in this cohort who's like, "Here's 9 questions to ask yourself."
hmm,
And it's like, whoa, those are some really deep
yeah,
questions. But because they care so much, I'm not taking that as, oh, like, screw this person for telling me to answer these questions. I'm taking this as like, I'm truly trying to learn and truly trying to become a better
yeah,
individual and also increase my business. And what's been interesting is like Thursday in particular, I'm crying on this call. I'm expressing my feelings and the things that I'm receiving as far as feedback. And instantly, like, after I'd opened it up, I'd become the most vulnerable. Everyone starts to plow. I had a few, like, just plow in their feelings and the things that they're saying. And I was like over there going, okay, I could easily read into this and be like, no, they're all just trying to tell me
yeah,
what I should do. But no, I
yeah,
actually listened. And I had one guy reach out and he's like, I can help you do this with your podcast. I can help you do this. In fact, have you considered this? And I got all this information. It was information
yeah,
overload from a bunch of successful people. And I'm sitting there going, holy crap.
yeah,
And I can tell you from Thursday to now, things have changed.
yeah,
Mentally, things have changed.
yeah.
It was like someone
That's really
flipped a
cool.
switch in my brain.
Vulnerability is powerful and willingness to accept like a very simple example, but I am part of like some homeschool groups on Facebook just to like share and collaborate. And someone posted something that piqued my interest because I'm always looking for new resources and different options. And I commented and shared part of like my experience with a certain like I call it like an umbrella company where you send your child's like progress, grades, whatever. There's several of them, and she was trying to, like, decide. Well, I shared, like, part of my experience, and, like, I was told her literally, I'm like, "I am, like, pretty new to this. I'm trying to figure it out, but, like, here's, what I've done. Like, I'm really looking forward to see what other people say on here because I want to learn." And then somebody commented on what I said and challenged something that I had stated,
Mhm.
saying that, like, "Oh, that's actually not exactly true. This is," and at first, like, the initial response, even though they were completely, like, kind, genuine, like, their intention was truly to help
Right.
and, like, help me see that, like, what I was saying, "Oh, it's actually better than that. There's
Mhm.
actually, like, a different way." And but immediately, like, my mind and body wanna be, like, offended. Like, "Oh,
Mm.
they've challenged my knowledge. They've
Mhm.
challenged my" like, I thought I was coming here to provide some knowledge, and now I'm being challenged.
Interesting.
And that was, like, my immediate, like, response in my mind for a split second, and then I, like, s stopped that, and I was like, "No, okay, like, go back and read the comment." So I went back and read it from a different perspective
Mm.
of, like, what if she's trying to help? What if she has my best interest and she sees more value that can
Mm.
be had? And so then I read it from that perspective, and I was, like, super grateful because I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh, I didn't actually know that there was this next step or this next level." So if I would have only considered that initial response, I missed out on learning something new. And then more on top of that, where I actually now have tools that I didn't have before I commented on that thread that
Right.
I'm excited about because now I feel more empowered. I feel more like elevated. I feel like I have knowledge that
Right.
I didn't even consider before. And so it's interesting though sometimes how like you have to like challenge that initial response in yourself to be like, okay, what if I consider that this is actually a good thing? What
Yeah.
if I don't consider that this person's trying to, like, attack my knowledge or my ego or whatever it is, or they're trying to look better than me? Like, I don't know. But all these little, like, things go through our minds as human beings, like,
Mhm.
that's why we're here on this earth, is to challenge that natural man.
See,
And so, if you do that though, like, I am like, "Holy cow, I have so much more that I walked away from, and I'm
yeah.
so grateful for it."
I think the biggest struggle in life as adults, as a kid, you're told all the things from your parents, the ones you love, the ones you trust, the things you're doing wrong.
Mhm.
You didn't do that right. Oh, you should have done
Yep,
it this way.
sometimes.
And your parents, and they're doing it out of love to help you. But I think that we take on this like, oh, well, I did it wrong in front of my parents. I don't want to let my parents down. At least for
Yeah,
me, I'm not going to speak for the listener, but I'm going to speak for me. And there were times where it was like, I don't want to let my parents down. I should have done this better. I should have done this. And then, like, I start to get the confidence of like, all right, I'm doing it the right way. And then, oh, you shouldn't have done this. And then you feel bad. And then there's always this like, I'm gonna hurt someone's feelings. Or like I remember
yeah,
specifically people would say, oh, that would just hurt someone. Like,
yeah,
have you considered that person? And like, well, no, I don't want to hurt that person. Like, so naturally I just create all this unconscious drama of I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. I want everything to be great. But then ultimately, at the end of the day, as an adult now, I'm now deciphering and going, am
yeah.
I
Is
actually
this
hurting?
box you've been, like, put in
Yeah.
actually, like,
Is it
what
actually
you want it to
true?
be?
Right? Because if I'm trying to help someone online and I'm giving them advice, if that person reads in that I'm just being a jerk,
Yeah,
well, no, naturally I want to help that person. So where's the disconnect? And I think that once again, it goes back down to that perfectionism, that the perfectionism traps us in this idea that everyone else around us that actually wants to help us, it blocks us from being
yeah,
able to receive the help because naturally we're on high alert because our entire life growing up we were told all the things that we
yeah,
didn't do right as opposed to being encouraged to do the
yeah,
things and saying that was an interesting take. I'd love to understand why you did it this way. And I think that as a parent that's one way you can start to change and start to raise your kids
sure.
instead of telling them they're wrong.
Well, and kids are so smart, like, I mean, I think that's something I do love considering and shifting in, like, my own parenting, is, like, rather than, like, always just telling how it is or how it should be,
Mhm.
give things to consider, give things for them to consider, plant ideas or seeds.
Right.
They will figure it out, like, they will likely make the right choice, quote, unquote, just by, like, putting the puzzle pieces together in their mind.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, like, whether the outcome would have been the same or not, regardless how you handled it, their purpose behind it is different, and their
Right.
purpose behind it is, like, they've got conviction of it in their heart, and it's not just like, "Oh, my mom or dad told me this is why, this is right, this is wrong." Like, you've given them things to consider, and they're making the decision.
Correct.
And, like, I mean, as simple as, like, a simple consequence, right? Rather than saying, "If you do that again, this will happen." Shifting those words just to say, like, "You can choose to do that thing, and if you do, you also choose this consequence." So, like, it's your choice. You choose this is the consequence you choose with it. You choose that, here's the,
Yeah.
consequence, and let them decide. Like, I mean, I still think consequences are a good thing for them to learn, but sometimes it's just the way we deliver it, right? Like, are
Sure.
we teaching them to
Be afraid.
be afraid?
Or
Is it fear-based, right? And a lot of times that is because of, like, creating this idea of perfection or, like, exactness, where it's
yeah.
like, maybe they just need to consider and then choose and allow their heart, allow their feelings to align and then choose, rather than just being told, like, here's what perfect is, here's what it looks like. And especially when it's, you should do this because it makes someone else happy or
Right.
because, like, other people will admire it or whatever. Like,
Right. Yeah,
anyways,
I think that
tangent there from me, but
I don't know if I'm qualified or prepared to have that conversation. There's still things that I'm working on as a parent,
oh, me too.
and
I think it's okay to be striving towards it.
yeah, it's great to be striving and aligning to teach
Yeah.
that, right? But I just find it so interesting that my whole life personally, and maybe you as a listener relate, but I was told all the things I did wrong, never really given all the things that I did right or the good decisions I made. It was always focused on the wrong. So
Mhm.
now my entire adulthood is now trying to go back and shift and say, what if that was actually right?
Yeah.
And so now I'm going back and fixing all these unconscious blockages in my life of what I thought or perceived as wrong. And now I'm going back and going, what if that was actually the right decision?
Yeah.
And what if these people actually weren't hurt by the way I spoke to them? Maybe they were actually elevated,
Right.
right? And then therefore, I shouldn't be afraid to share my opinion or help, or I
Yeah.
shouldn't have to worry whether that person is going to
And
be
then be
offended or not.
discerning and consider things, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, I think we should consider the way that we make other people feel with the way that we deliver
Sure.
things or the way, right? Like, that's a good thing, but
Right.
in the right way. And I
Exactly.
think it's not just parenting. It's like the school system, it's politics, it's, going through like these cookie cutter systems all your life. Your creativity and your like desire to do something different or to challenge a
Mhm.
model, it dwindles because it's like for so long it's either this or that. It's right or wrong. Like you got to do your math this exact way. Like
Yeah.
there's some ways of learning, like, in my mind that I'm like, "That doesn't click with me," like, and I actually can do this math in my head like that if I do it this way, right?
Yeah.
So being able to consider your needs, yourself, the way that you thrive, and, let go of this idea of, like, perfection,
Well, and
and that is one thing.
I'm gonna get a little scriptural here. This is the adversary's world,
Mhm,
and the adversary, what we believe is that the adversary projected a plan, that it was a perfect plan, that if everyone followed it, it was perfection. If everyone
mhm,
followed it detail per detail. And it's ironic that, like you mentioned, the government system, the school system, everything has this like code or this way. It's the perfect
mhm,
way, when realistically perfection blocks our creativity in the different ways we could actually shine and handle it and be
yeah,
a light to other people, because there's no cookie cutter way to life,
no.
and there's so
That's
many
why we
different
have
ways.
agency, that's why we're
So
allowed to choose.
what I'm drawing to a conclusion here is like it's actually very important for you to be challenging those thoughts of like, why am I feeling this way? Because
And
it
aware of
allows you,
those
and becoming
things.
more aware, because it allows you to break the mold of the plan of the adversary and allows you to become more like God by looking at ways differently to create the outcome in the world you want to
Right.
live.
I'm pretty sure I've made a plug for the book before, but you told me about a book and I read it.
Mhm.
You read so many books,
So
like
many.
so many books, and I admire that about you. But this, I've read a couple of the ones that you have recommended to me. And
Mhm.
this one, Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill, literally changed my life and my mindset as far as like just I don't even know. I can't put it into words. You just got to go read it.
Yeah.
Like just elevation, right? Like
Right.
rising above trials, adversity, like just the world in general.
Right.
How and quote unquote outwitting the devil. Anyways, it's a really cool book and a cool perspective.
It's a fantastic read.
I loved it.
Probably top 3 books
It's in my top 3
I would
currently. Yeah.
recommend. But just want to say thank you to the listener tonight. We went really deep on perfectionism, and I just want to invite you to consider that what if perfectionism didn't ever exist?
Yeah.
What if you were perfect already in the way that you decided and the way that you acted and everything was great already? Instead of striving for this perfection, what if it was already perfect for you?
Mhm.
What would that be for you? How liberating would that feel for you? Could you see yourself differently? Could you hear the way you speak differently? Could you hear the way people speak to you differently? I want you to consider those things and then ask yourself, am I living life based off of my model of the world and the way I want to live it? And am I aligned as opposed to worrying about perfection?
Yeah.
And that's my challenge tonight for you. Well, tonight while we're recording this podcast, but for you, whenever you're listening to this, to ask yourself that question. Because I truly believe that perfectionism hinders your growth. It boxes you in, like Ambry mentioned, into nothing in
A
essence.
specific idea that may not even
Yeah. And I'm going to ask
exist.
you, is your perfectionism as a listener keeping you from actually creating and doing the thing that you truly want to do in this world? The thing you know deep down in your heart, the thing that would give you all of the satisfaction in the entire world, is the perfectionism that you're trying to live boxing you from getting there? And that's one of the questions that I'm going to ask you and have you consider and ponder. It's one of
It's a
the
great one for me.
questions.
I'll be considering it this week because I
It's
know that I know that there's things that I can apply that to currently that
me too.
yeah.
It's one
So
of the questions my coach asked me in a roundabout way. Thank you guys for listening to Matrimonial Merger. For those that are really into following us, we created this video. This is the first one. So you're
yeah.
gonna start seeing us like actually live and our emotions because like it's great to hear us, but to actually see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a visual person, so to actually see the emotions and the way that we're talking and
Now you
interacting is
now you get to
fantastic.
see like when Jesse says something and I'm like
Mm,
and you didn't usually get to see that before. Like
yeah,
and I would just look at him like
interesting.
what?
And same thing where I'm
Now
like
you get to
looking at
see
Ambry
that.
going, huh. So, go check us out on YouTube. And for more information, please reach out to us. We'd love to help.
Tell us what you're experiencing right now. What feedback are you facing?
Absolutely. It's one of my favorite things is when we get a text message and someone is vulnerable enough to ask, and it allows us the opportunity. And I'll tell you that the feedback we've gotten from some of our best episodes that we've had,
Oh
the
yeah.
most listened to episodes are the ones where people asked a question and
100%.
we were able to go and actually
Yeah.
I think the Your Value one is our top listened episode,
Mhm.
and it came from a listener, and we just got word, and as humbling and grateful we are about this, we got word that that value podcast was actually shared with a sales team,
Oh, nice.
and so
That's awesome. That's
um,
a little intimidating, but I like it.
yeah, with an entire
Let's
sales
go.
team, like this guy shared it. He's a regional manager,
Oh, sweet.
and
That's cool.
he shared it with the sales team, but it was because of a question that came
Yeah.
from you as a
Well, and
listener.
I think what builds so much fire behind that, right, is, like, typically, like, if you're teaching something, you're learning so
Right,
much, and so when
right.
it comes from, like, a question, like, you dig deep, you want to learn, and I think I learned so much
Mhm.
in those specifically those episodes that, like, it can't help but just be incredible because
Yeah.
it gives me a lot more, I don't know, just, like, fire and energy because 'cause I'm like, "This is
What I
I'm learning, I'm feeling it."
what I love about it so much too is it was one person's vulnerable question that then was shared with multiple people,
Mhm.
right? That's the whole purpose of this
Spreads
show
like
is to
wildfire when
bring a community together.
yeah,
So our top rated show is because someone reached out vulnerable and we
yeah.
answered based off of a helping giving way. And that podcast was then impacted someone else who then went and shared it with other people. And that's the community Ambry and I are trying to build
Be
to this
willing to put
podcast.
yourself out there and ask the question. I used to be so afraid of that, like,
Yeah. We
literally.
won't drop
I
your name.
mean,
We won't say anything like
unless
we
you want us to because you're amazing.
right.
No, but honestly, like, I used to like, I literally there was a time in our marriage when, like, Jesse would like, there would be a question, I'd be wanting to just kinda, like, consider it through my mind, analyze, like, I'd wanna kinda, like, know all the details first. Jesse would just, like, go ask someone, and it used to make me feel so uncomfortable because I don't know why. I don't know what I was afraid of.
Yeah.
Like, I think I was just afraid of not knowing. So, like, maybe I thought I would look dumb if I had to ask. I don't know.
My
But it
favorite
makes
one
me laugh now because I always have admired that about you, but
My favorite one was 2 a.m. in a convenience store, and I'm asking someone strung out on like probably heroin or something, crack, if they had a tampon.
that's
And
a story. If you
that's
wanna
a
hear that,
story.
we'll probably have to share that story at some point now because some people are out there like, "What are you doing at a convenience store at 2 a.m. asking some random person for a tampon?"
Hey,
That's a
when
good that's a
when
good
you live with
story.
us, like if you follow us enough, you get some crazy stuff. But thank you so
Oh,
much for listening
man.
to Matrimonial Merger. Please give us your honest feedback. Reach out with any questions. You guys are beautiful people, and
Thanks for
we
being here.
appreciate the support. This show continues to grow every single day, and we hope you have a fantastic week.